today we're very excited about a topic I think that's very timely and also really reflects upon where design is in 2025. We've had a couple of interview sessions over the last month with Carly and Jose, and now we are very excited to have them actually join us for this webinar. We are getting started right now, so please, if you're on the call, I think a couple of people are still coming in. Let's get started. I want to make introductions. So Jose Manuel dos Santos, I'm pronouncing this really worse probably, but uh, is head of design and user experience at Signify. Signify is, who doesn't know, the world's largest lighting company. Really spun out of Philips in the Netherlands and is a globally established company and a leader in IoT technology, but also I would say on the design side, that's always been on the forefront, especially with like the heritage coming from Philips. And Carly Price, senior design director, sorry, at ServiceNow, really has a very diverse set of backgrounds. Working at IDEO, working at Smart Design, working at Walmart. Physical to digital, I would say, and also recently started her own entrepreneurial career doing a Kickstarter that was very successful. So I'm going to start with Carly, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your background and also maybe pitch your Kickstarter and how did it all came together.
Sure. So thank you for having me. It's really great to be here with you, Gregor and Jose. So I began my career as an industrial designer, as Gregor mentioned, working in consumer products in New York at Smart Design, then a period of time at IDEO. And I think my career really expanded in my later years at Smart and at IDEO because the design world was changing during those times. So this was like the early to mid aughts where industrial design had been very prevalent and there were many companies hiring industrial designers, and there was an opportunity to have like a full rich career in ID. But our client base was changing in consulting from developing a physical good to developing services and digital experiences and then embedded digital in retail. So my career evolved as our portfolio of work evolved. But I've always kind of dipped, even though I'm pretty much full on UX and digital now, I still have my industrial design roots that I tap into and leverage. So I recently worked at Walmart where most of my team was digital UX designers, but there was a small team of environments and industrial designers. So we did work on physical digital integration. And then in my time at Casper, which was 10 years ago, as well as my own startup, Live Labs, I was developing physical products. So I'll always have that love of developing real tangible goods and I'll draw from those skills. Live Labs, my startup, we developed, it's a women's consumer health product that supports pelvic floor fitness. We've been on a long journey. We started more as a medical device. We had worked for years on that development path, but we've made a pivot recently to launching it more as a consumer wellness product. So that's how we were able to finally launch on Kickstarter and make it available to consumers.
Excellent. Well, Jose, maybe you can talk a little bit about your journey. I think there's also physical, digital, and all kinds of other aspects. Right? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think you did that on purpose to bring two trained industrial designers to the table because I know you also share that love, and that's also my case. I worked in consultancy for many years. I went from designer to kind of director also in that stage of the time, and then I did a stint in terms of companies of my own. So I started a couple of them and sold them, and they're still alive, which means that I must have done something wrong in terms of the seed I planted. I did become a millionaire, but then that's that's part of the deal sometimes. And then about 15 years ago, I wanted to try large corporations after having done different sizes. I was in Portugal and Spain. I did my master's in London, so I was jumping around, but I wanted to try the US. And I found a very good headhunter, Sarita Sue Siegel, who found me a place in the US. And I started working first for the first 5 years in a large Fortune 500, and then I was invited to join in this case, what still used to be Philips Lighting at that point, and then became Signify. My good friend Pierre-Yves Pani, who used to be my boss, invited me. I remember at that time I asked him, are you sure about this? Because I don't know anything about lighting. And I was like, is it on? Is it on or off? And he said, no, I'm hiring you for what you know about design. Don't worry, you'll meet enough people that know about lighting. And he was right. At least now I know that I don't know. I know a little bit more, but I know that I don't know. And it's been a fantastic journey uh, driving with teams that are mixed industrial design, but also UX, UI designers and experience designers.
Excellent. Yeah, I think, especially as you become leadership in an organization, right, the lines get a little blurry, right? I mean, Carly, you went from pretty much Walmart, which was very, physical goods. I mean, obviously there's a digital component in delivery, but it's like, ultimately they're shipping things, right? To now a ServiceNow, which is an enterprise software platform, right? So it's or explain what ServiceNow is. That's at least my assumption.
Sure. Yeah. So my role at Walmart was in the digital space. So working on the consumer facing application in business areas, including things like auto care. So with auto care, you can purchase products from Walmart, but you can also schedule services. I was responsible for the design for the Walmart Plus membership experience. So that was taking kind of the end-to-end typical customer journey, the journey for everybody, and thinking, how can we enhance this and really celebrate membership and consistently remind people of the value of their membership. So while many people experience Walmart as a physical environment, my team was really like 90% of us were working on the app. So my career has really progressed from starting in pure physical to doing digital and physical in varying levels. From my in-house roles at Casper, then Pippa, my startup for Live Labs. Then when I moved into Chase, it became much more digitally focused. It was about embedding technology in the environment and connecting the consumer's app experience into the branch experience. In my time at Ford Motor Company, we were looking at the connected vehicle, the software-enabled vehicle. And then Walmart was probably my most digital focused job in my career until I started at ServiceNow just 1 month ago. My first day was June 30th. And that is truly a SaaS company, software as a service. And ServiceNow is really focused on improving the way people work every day. So we make enterprise software that's used for IT service management, IT asset management, HR, and where the business has been expanding into other areas, but it's really a pure software play. What I find interesting about just having a design career that's been so expansive is the same principles I learned as an industrial designer, I apply to UX. So considering every small detail, every small radius, color, material, finish, weight, all of that applies on a screen as it does to a 3D object. So it's really taking the same sort of eye for quality, eye for beauty and utility and functionality, and being very human-centered, and embracing research and understanding people, all of that methodology applied.
Makes sense. What's your perspective on a new Apple iOS? I'm going deep here.
You sure you want to go there, Greg?
Honestly, I think it's interesting that sort of glass morphism that we've been kind of going through these different phases of having, UI around the initial iPhone use skeuomorphic elements to remind you of the physical objects. And I remember it being so jarring, such a big change when the iconography became flat. And people really didn't like it at first, but then they adapt. And now when you see skeuomorphic elements, they seem a little bit out of place. So I think it's just a continuous evolution. Like, things always change. Things begin to feel stale. They evolve, and then we kind of come back to where we were. I forget which podcast I was listening to. They were talking about the 90s, how all kids are like listening to 90s music, and there's 90s fashion, acid wash jeans. Whoever thought that would come back? So when I see something like the Apple design language change, it's just another phase that will evolve through.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, right? We're working on a interesting product right now that is, very much like I would say considered classical industrial design. And, even as we are kind of in 2025, we're looking at data RAMs a lot. I feel like
Yes.
the reduction, we always talk about the reduction is kind of and it's interesting, right? Because you can go in a certain direction, but then at some point you have to reduce again, right? So
I
um,
also think that when the whole paradigm went flat, it became very functional and focused on the results. Now we always made jokes about enjoying the journey as much as the destination. And so variations like this, they bring back some sort, and for some people it might be joy, for other people is distraction, for other people is whatever you want to call it. But it is certainly they add a detail to the journey.
right,
So and hopefully that will not take away from the from getting to where you need to. But there's I think there's overall even I hear about more conversations about decorative lighting and things like that. So I think this is happening everywhere. And it's just that we've got to this level of functionality and of execution and of delivery and even of a systemization that people are longing for a little bit of more of, variation and of pleasure in the journey,
right.
whatever that might be.
And I think, I'm going to pivot back to our topic because, Jose, I think it's a really, really good perspective. I feel like leadership that doesn't understand the design process a lot of times sees design as this kind of like, we're just going to make it pretty. First, we're going to make it work and then we're going to make it pretty. But they don't understand that, making it work is also making it pretty. And in a sense, the two cannot be separated. And as, human-centered technology really evolves and becomes more tech-driven, designers have to be on the table when those tech decisions are made, right? And I'd love to hear, maybe Jose, start you with this, because I think you've had lots of experience with this, where you get something that is basically technically functioning, but it doesn't really fit within what the user's needs are, right? And how do you navigate that
Yeah,
mix?
I mean, I work in a corporation that traditionally is very IP strong. I mean, we've invented the light bulb, and so that and we are still, if not, my data says that right now, Signify is still the biggest holder of patents around lighting in the world. And so when companies value their IP and they have a lot of smart people that are working in the back trying to create variations of technology that will serve the better purposes, sometimes it's user focused, sometimes it's more production focuses, this or that, then you tend to have an organization that tends to push that, a lot of that, as the main driver. And so in the end, design needs to continue to ask those questions, and sometimes those questions are tough to answer, which is, where, how to drive and where to take things from there. So, I mean, I see we have a strong backbone of IoT, we have a strong backbone of technology, we have a strong backbone of all of these different things. But in the end, designers are asked to keep asking, the questions about people and how people will use it and what people will do with it. Do people need these things? And these are hard questions because there's a bunch of other things around which are there for a reason and which tend to drive concepts, tend to drive direction, design direction, and even, launches and all of that in a very kind of a particular way. And this is where I find that sometimes the designers themselves might, as themselves, they discuss and they ask these questions, but when they need to go out of that room and talk to other people and ask those questions to other people, to business leaders, to partners and stuff like that, that's when the conversation sometimes breaks down, because unless you really are maybe even trained to do that, you tend to come across as either, you know, naive or obstinate or this or that. People don't grasp, why are you asking these questions? Where are you coming from? What are you trying to say? Are you valuing? What are you prioritizing and things like that? So you need to be very articulate and you need to understand the language, but also it's not only the language, but it's the grammar and the whole thing that is inside language that is not just about vocabulary.
Makes sense. Yeah, Carly, I'd like to hear your perspective because I think this is a really good point, right? So as a designer, you're always some sort of change agent within an organization, right? And there's always hard conversations to navigate. I mean, I think traditionally the different disciplines in an organization have kind of rubbing points against each other. I mean, research and development, manufacturing, or sales and marketing, right? But design is always kind of like maybe in the middle of all of these conversations, right? I'd love to hear, how as a design leader do you navigate that?
My attitude is really to presume good and seek to collaborate with anyone and everyone. And it's very easy. I mean, sometimes I think we all feel as designers some level of frustration if someone just describes our work as what it looks like. Oh, do we really need design? Like, you guys just determine what color it is or how it looks, the look and feel. So in those moments, I again presume good, that no one is intending to minimize what design can actually contribute. I think it's just a lack of really understanding. So I try to just help correct the language in like a constructive way, not in a, hey, you've offended me, hey, you need to respect me, but just demonstrating what we can do.
Right.
So I think people want design, but they don't necessarily, they're not trained in it or haven't worked with it a lot. They don't necessarily have the language to communicate. We don't have the language to communicate with each other well. So I think designers don't necessarily speak the same language as business people because they're so focused on what's, you know, I was talking to another designer who's also an entrepreneur recently, and we talked about how I think both of us had a very clear idea of what we wanted it to be and didn't want to compromise. But sometimes to be successful in business, you need to make compromises. So designers can be really, really steadfast and like, oh, this is going to be, we have to make this as beautiful and perfect and amazing as possible. And then there's reality. And sometimes you need to compromise a bit on that reality. So I think designers can be more curious about what drives business decisions. What are the metrics that we're really going for? Seeking like perfection may not be the best way for us to be successful. And then at the same time, I think we should be patient and understanding and constructive when we feel like our business partners aren't hearing or seeing us or valuing us. Like how do we change our language and the way we express ourselves so we can be understood better by them?
Right. I feel the best designers deliver stellar results within the realities of technology, business, and kind of overall, kind of realities of running a company, right? And I think, early on in my career, I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to basically present to C-level people and, kind of advocate for design. And these became really meaningful conversations for me, and understanding and reflecting upon those realities really shaped my vision of what design is. And in a sense, also, if you can kind of, I mean, design is a dialogue, right? If you take that input and then you alter the results and still deliver stellar design, that's the real beauty of design, right? It's not that ivory tower design that you can do in a vacuum. It's really that the delivery of that design that makes an impact.
This is all true, but we also realize the needs, the requirements of excellent design, and that includes, of course, having people, designers at play, and also the needs and requirements of designers in order to produce great design. And so, while all of this is true, then we deal also with the reality of how much. Like I've always said that I hated the type of design where people go up into the back room, do all the work, and then show up and go, ta-da, because I usually 90% of the times that fails, because that ta-da, instead of creating the right type of, feedback, generates the, what is this, who asked this, for, you didn't ask me for anything, not made here, all the things that we know that come together with that. But also I've been the one that set some signs that design by committee can be, not only a painful thing, but basically result in bad design. And so, how much seclusion, how much non-disturbance, how much focus, how much flow, however you want to call it, do designers, the activity of design needs, how much exposure to the realities that you just mentioned, where of technology, what this does it need, when does it need? This becomes a real art. And I think that a lot of design, like I say to myself and to my team that my job is to create the best conditions for them to do great design. But that in itself, it becomes then the question is how do you balance these? When do you expose? When do you close it up? When, how do you show it? All these things, that this dance, this dialogue ends up being the real artistic uh, part of generating and creating great design, which yes comes always out of compromise, but exactly how you compromise, when you compromise, and why you compromise then becomes the real issue.
Right. And also, how do you navigate that compromise, right? I feel like there is different ways of mitigating realities through leadership, but also through, I would say, change management, right? I mean, Carly, you said it well, like some companies don't have a culture of design. And how do you become, how do you morph an organization into a design-centered organization? It's not through butting heads, it's through showing the way and delivering results.
Yeah, I think for the most part, people all want the same thing. They all want what we're working on to be successful.
Right.
And in the more functional organizations I've worked in, there's less infighting around who's responsible for what, and more of everyone really knowing what their role is and working towards success together. So keeping the customer top of mind, knowing where our business is headed and how and why we want to get there. And again, like I think showing up and assuming that all of your colleagues, no matter what their discipline is or what their background is, that we're all trying to work towards common goals. And when you have that top of mind, I think compromises, there's always compromise. I was just in a review this morning where, we are launching something this year and there are feasibility constraints on what we can actually produce in that amount of time. So it's not going to be the ideal experience. And everybody knows that, but we're working together to determine how do we make this the best possible experience that it can be given all these constraints. And sometimes the constraints are technical, sometimes they're financial. If we don't want perfect to be the enemy of good or getting anything out the door in the first place. I think one of the things just to watch out for is there's, a culture of launching MVPs. We have to make sure that we do consider it an MVP and that we continue to improve it over time and not just sort of launch the MVP, say, okay, pass, fail, yes, no. Okay, that one failed, so we're going to move on, or it's good enough, we're just going to leave it as it is. If we want to work towards excellence, how do we continue to make it better over time? And I think that really applies to software. To me, that's the biggest difference in working in physical versus digital is when you're working on physical goods, you're cutting that tool, you're dedicated to that, multi-$1,000, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in tooling, and you want to get a lot of life out of that. So you have to be right at the outset. Whereas with software, you can launch something that's getting close to what you want it to be and then improve it over time because it's a living thing that will always need to evolve.
Yeah.
Which also comes with a responsibility, right? Because it's a living thing, you need to support it. It becomes an ecosystem.
And I think that's why I tend to use sometimes the word minimum lovable, which sometimes, because if you have love for things and treat more MVPs more like seeds that you need to take care of and grow, then because I do recognize what you're saying, Carly, that the organizations, once they know how to do MVPs, they start going through MVPs like you go through clothing from Shein. So, it's like, and that's not what the kind of culture that you want to create.
Right. In the 90s, 80s, 90s, organizations spun up very large design groups. It was the kind of the golden age of design consulting for sure. $1 billion, not billion, but $1 million budgets. I would say some designers were not able to deliver on those promises, right? I'd love to hear, like, I feel like we're in a much different time now where it's a more rational approach to design innovation, which sometimes can sound really stifling, but I feel still the people that can deliver results ultimately get the resources to do so, right? I'd love to hear from you guys a little bit that shift. I mean, Carly, you were at the golden age of IDEO, right? Where it was kind of the new way of doing things and really redefining how human-centered design is perceived. And some of these projects were really successful. Other ones were probably not, and it probably didn't reflect on IDEO badly, but also maybe it also had to do with the realities of business or the realities of finance or all kinds of other aspects, right? Love to hear from both of you. I don't know who wants to start, but how did design leadership change in the last 20 years?
To say the least.
Well, it's a $1 million question, right?
I can start, but I'm really curious to hear Carly because she's in the middle of the hurricane also. My feeling is that a lot of these, we have to remember that the leading business model that used to deliver things that were not able to be manufactured was called consulting. Okay, consulting was the one that was known for delivering these, and there's the white rabbits and the whole thing of delivering reports, big things that the companies couldn't implement and couldn't do that. And that's also why consultancy at a certain moment, and Mr. John Maeda used to track that, and then he got tired of all the acquisitions that consulting did at design companies because they understood that with design companies, they could actually, put their foot inside into the materialization and the execution and deliver a lot more to companies. But of course, they absorbed it and killed it many times or did something with it. But design leadership, I think, has changed as much as everything else in the companies have changed. And those that have not changed have not been able to remain relevant, just like other leaderships. And you will ask marketing if marketing has changed, and they'll tell you how much has changed. Ask branding how much branding has changed the last 20 years, and they'll tell you how much branding is. So all of these things have changed because corporations, and I think that people don't talk about this, but the reality right now, there's a lot of conversations about the impact of globalization, and we're seeing some really weird knee-jerk reactions to that and all sorts of things going from politics to policy and all over the place. But globalization was part of the impact of what happened to corporations and how corporations had to change and how that changed everything, including design. And right now we're still reeling from that, from people like Carly and me having to maybe put hubs in India or somewhere else, and to all the things that are happening that are connected to those realities. So I just don't see design as being like this. I don't see myself as being part of a troubled child. And design is just like many other competencies, many other groups of people that are being impacted by the way corporations trade, is being impacted through the way the world is being architectured.
Well thought. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, the arc that I've seen when I started my career in the 90s, designers, we produced tangible outputs consistently. Like that was what we did. And then as we were entering the aughts, human-centered design became more of that became infused into the way we worked. And companies would ask us in all of the different design firms I worked for, help us figure out, more of this white space area. So we would come up with a lot of ideas and solutions that were grounded in human needs, grounded in, business opportunities. But oftentimes we weren't actually hired to design the full solution. We were asked to do more of the strategic, creative part. So I went from producing a lot of, CAD files and models and prototypes and tangible things to all of a sudden developing a lot of decks and posters and other assets to give a company so then they could take it to the next step. And over a series of years, I developed a lot of decks and assets, but not that many assets that were used by consumers. And I found that at a certain point to be quite dissatisfying. that's when I decided to go into the startup space and became more tangible again. But I feel like that was during that era is when design I felt was becoming more embraced by big companies. Like when I was at IDEA, we would be hired to do like these internal transformation projects where we were infusing our capabilities into the company. And then the company started hiring designers and building those capabilities within. And I've been in some of those teams. And where I think internal teams struggled was we were still in the mindset of making decks and ideas and strategies, but had lost the skills, and our younger designers were not getting trained to actually build, whether it's a digital asset or a physical asset. And we were more thinkers and creators of strategy, but we weren't able to really deliver what like a McKinsey or a Deloitte would deliver in terms of business strategy. So then it became a little bit, well, what value is this team creating? So the designers that I see that have survived and where I see a real focus now is on designers that build things that get produced. So a lot of digital design teams are focused on production and roadmaps, but then we become a little bit more tactical. So here's your feature set. Here are the epics, here are the stories, here are the features. And what we want to still be valued and used for our strategic mindset, business context, user needs, feasibility, viability, desirability. We can still do all of those things. I think what we really need to make sure we maintain is that ability to think strategically and deliver. And that's what design can do uniquely that the other disciplines don't do.
Yeah. And it's also about that middle. My friend, if you don't know Michael Margolis, you should learn about him. He's a fantastic storyteller. And he talks the messy middle, and he just put out a post about this. Because we were discussing, me and him, about for many years we were on the execution side, and everybody aspired to be on strategy and to be able to define not only design the thing right, but discuss and be able to have a say on what was the right thing to be doing. So, and there was a movement, there was a shift where we started to be invited to do that. But what happens, like you said, we create a lot of stuff for drawers and for shelves, that just ended up. And on the other side, we still had entire engines. Actually, companies had these two engines separate. They had one engine for asset production and execution, and another for the thinking people, etc. They created that. So that middle started to become really the place where a lot of things died, and we were unable many times to even do our own ideas to do the baton race, from one side to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that this has created this, a lot of what Gregor said about the certain disenchantment about design was because I'm not sure that this was something that we complained a lot, but I'm not sure we understood that we were part of the problem and part of the solution, that we had to deal with that. But that part of the lack of it is that a lot of the stuff that were produced, with research, human-centric design, that ended up in drawers and in shelves and stuff like that, it became for a lot of designers their demise in a lot of ways. So what survived and what, here we are, is getting things done, I'm not going to say swear words on this call, but it's getting things done. And so execution and really being able to, to build out and craft out these entire systems, but really getting it done, getting it out the door, has become, again, what survived. So in a certain way, it's almost like a loop. We're back to that place where a lot of designers, start, because we like to talk about some of our forefathers, but that also was in a complete industrial age different, when a designer went to work for IBM and, and were able to be side by side with Watson. I mean, that time, or in John Deere, or this and that time is just gone. And so it seems like we in this big grand arc and are back to what we know how to do very well, and we should be very focused in doing. But something tells me that bug about strategy and about thinking of solutions for the future is still there. And right now, we've seen all the think tanks being dismantled, all the things. It's VUCA, 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 and and we can't look at the future. We can't plan for the future. And that's certainly it's not gonna help anybody.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time with all of the disruption because of AI and the potential of AI, fear of jobs it'll take away, potential of what it can do. There's what I like to focus on is how can humans use AI to basically like speed up our processes, speed up our thinking, and maybe take some of the more tactical tasks off of our plates. What I want to ensure is that we still have, like, I think about that apprenticeship model, and how I learned my skills was really doing a lot of the detailed sort of, I don't want to just call it pure production work. I remember, years and years ago being an intern at Smart Design and making models by hand. And that's how I really learned the craft of form giving. So there are equivalents to that in UX design that are around detailing designs for production and, VQA and usability. And if a lot of those things get outsourced to AI, then we don't necessarily have our next generation learning those fundamentals. But this isn't unique to design. It's very common across all different industries. I was listening to a podcast yesterday. I'm a big baseball fan, so I was listening to a sports podcast, and it was the host was talking to a journalist about their industry. They both started as newspaper writers, and what happened to that industry. It's so prevalent. It's affecting so many jobs. So I think I spent time on LinkedIn when I was in between roles this year, and it can be very, very bleak with people questioning the future and being very fearful of AI taking over all of the creative jobs. So I think that it's sometimes as a designer, you can look and think, oh my gosh, design is in trouble. I think we need to think like at a macro level, like this is changing not just design, but many, many, many other professions.
Yeah.
And it's really, I think humans will always be needed. It's just living in this discomfort and ambiguity while we're determining what that is. And we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think we'll
Indeed,
always
yeah.
need to be building things. We'll always need to be designing. We'll always need to be strategic.
Indeed.
I think I'm glad you guys bringing this up because I feel like I have, when I teach adjunct at RISD, and I remember, there's students that are really interested in UX, right? And they always go, I want to learn UX, and I don't want to do all this woodworking and metalworking and building physical prototypes. And I'm always trying to tell them that it's that it's really that cognitive focus that teaches you design. It's jumping into Figma is not going to teach you design. It's probably better for your design UX career to take a woodworking class than to actually learn how to master Figma, right?
But you, my friend, you're an old guy. Let's just assume this because you just talked about the mantra of Steve Jobs, learning typography in order to become better at what he does. I make jokes that the best thing about AI is the IA, which is individual augmentation, and so I ask people, what do you need augmented, and are you aware of that? Are you aware of the areas that you need augmentation? And if that's the case, then that's the first step, because then, yeah, through AI, you can probably do some of that and do a lot of that. But I've always said jokingly that the worst thing you can go is ask a designer to do exactly the same as somebody else has. You don't go ask a designer, can you just copy that thing for me? Or can you do exactly something average that everybody else has? Can you do that for me? It's like a really bad use of your money. And so if we go to designers to ask about how to differentiate, how to add value, how to bring freshness, how to delight, all these things that we know that's what you go to ask the designers. If you go and ask AI this, many times what you get is really just the average stuff. Because, that's how AI is trained. AI is trained is creating the average out of everything that's out there. And so that's why humans need to be in the loop, designers need to be in the loop. But the trick that comes to us, and I think more of us will have to learn, is that where do I want to be in the loop? Because the loop it's not even one loop. There's 1,000 loops. But okay, it's just like people talk about human in the loop, but where do you want to be in the loop? What do you want to be doing in that loop? There's a joke about the guy, I want AI to do my dishes, not to do my poetry. Okay, so that's a definition. I want to be the one doing the poetry and the leisure and the good stuff, and I want AI to be washing my dishes and vacuuming my home. Okay, but then position yourself and work in that sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we had this in your interview, Jose, and that was the idea of editorial roots, right? Like where do you really want to apply your cognitive skill and your design skill, right? And I think that's going to be much more of a conversation moving forward. But to be
We
honest,
did
like,
say that, yes.
but design education sometimes does not communicate the idea of editorial roots, right? It's really not part of a design education. And I think that's the biggest challenge a lot of times.
And I'll give you an example because I was having this conversation with a young intern. In the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of complaint to design schools that they were not preparing those students with a decent portfolios. A lot of students were getting out of schools and they didn't have decent portfolios. So the schools heard, and what did they do? They do what typically schools do. They prepare the system, a tool, a flow. They even gave all these designers the same template, the same online tool to create portfolios and stuff like that. And now what you do is you get hundreds of portfolios that look exactly the same. Not only that, but because they do group projects, sometimes you see the same project with the same images, in three different portfolios without even mentioning who did what. So the intern was asking me, he says, what do I do? He says, well, you need to understand what part is the system and the platform that the schools are giving you, but you have to understand that that thing needs to come through with individuality, that I need to look at your portfolio and understand why are you special? Why are you different? What makes you special and different? So unless you're able to show that in the portfolio, yeah, I'm going to turn off the portfolio on the second or third page because that template, that format, that online tool that you're using, your entire school is using it.
Right. What did they say?
Well, the kid said, well, but now I need to go back, as practical mind. Now I need to go back and and I don't know if I can, how far can I push, go there, push the boundaries and, see how far you can extend that. But there's got to be, I don't know, put your last page, your front page, so this is the whole thing about curatorial and about individuality and about how to bring specialty to the table, because that part, then we need to go back, and the more tools we have to be able to make things systematic, the more we need to remind human beings about how special they are and what they need to do in order to show themselves. I don't know if this makes any sense, but okay. It's
It
not
totally
being
makes
recorded, right?
Carly,
I hope
anything
not.
before I move to the next topic?
Mm.
We have about 15 more minutes, so I want to kind of touch a little bit on. I mean, we already talked about AI and the future of design and the future of design leadership, and I think there's a real fear that I have, and I think Carly, you voiced this basically that we won't have the next generation of designers if we don't have a rigorous kind of, I would say, path to become a leader, right? And I feel like design leadership these days is not something that you can teach people. It's something that you have to learn through real life experiences. I mean, Carly, you've been at Ford, Chase, IDEO. I mean, that all is experience that nobody takes away from you, right? It really formed your leadership backbone, I would say. How do we create an environment for the next generation to do the same?
Um, I think it depends on what someone wants, what they want their journey to be. So I worked with really talented designers throughout my career who were really interested in staying with craft and wanted to continue to be practitioners throughout their career and were less interested in leading or managing or interfacing with the business partners as much, um, versus like growing more design leadership and potentially like walking away from some of the hands-on work, but being able to speak to the value of design and position it well within an organization. And then even like leading and building and running design organizations in companies is almost like a special skill set because you have to manage both sides, like
Right.
understand what the creative teams need to thrive and the unique, I mean, designers always need like a unique set of tools and um, I don't know that I found it to be when I've worked in like more or less sort of like pure design or pure creative environments, that the ones that were really, really felt more like what I experienced in my agency time or my consultancy time. There needs to be a bit more like nurturing and cultural touch points to really help people feel their like most free creative selves. So in a big company, like setting out all those conditions, like how do we create time and space for design to do all the things that designers need to nurture that creativity, yet also have them deliver things that are super relevant. I feel like that's a special skill set to be able to balance both of those.
Right.
Whereas being in the consulting world or the agency world, it's a lot of very like-minded people in the same culture, and often there'd be, I know, Gregor, you're still living this like business. We always had business development people who would do a lot of like the landing of the projects with clients, and then the designers could do their thing. In a big company, the other reason I moved into like working internally was it felt like my future was going to be a lot of business development, and I was less interested in that. So when you work internally, you don't have to do as much business development, but you have to do more like long-term relationship development.
Right.
So
Which
I feel like
basically
designers can grow into any of those things, really. Like, I want to stay a practitioner. I want to be more business and company oriented. I think my last point will be, I think it's harder than ever to run a design consultancy in this business climate, like what you were saying, Jose, at the beginning around like tariffs and like just what's happening globally. I feel like companies are really being very cautious on their spend right now. So internally, we're getting sort of starved, like, can you create more with less? We're not going to add more. Like, how can we reallocate what we have to deliver what we need to deliver? And then I presume that budgets are just harder to find for consultancies.
right. I mean, I can't speak of other consultancies, but we Loft has definitely always grown and been successful on delivery, right? And I would say strategic delivery, right? And so then your dialogue with your client is a very different one because you're really taking over part of an R&D spend, right? Versus being augmenting kind of an internal function, right? So I think it's a better place to be, and we're very focused on kind of digital ecosystems in general, and I think, but I agree with you. I think that the convent, Jose, you said this, the conventional agency is not existing anymore, right? It's not only design agencies, right? Like, I feel like design agencies become much more digital product development shops, right? Or physical product development shops in a sense, right? So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and you know this, Gregor. I did a little bit of research about design in large corporations, and when I went and did that research, my question was, why aren't there more trained designers, in C-suite? And then what came back was a number of reasons, and 10 of them, and two of them were aligned with what Carly was saying, and that was true. In the beginning, I actually thought, maybe this is more, mythology, but it was true. First, that designers uh, there's a bunch of designers who are not interested, and they make that choice very early. And they find ways to be individual contributors in different contexts and settings that allows them to have a certain level of ambition and a certain level of quality of life, and they're fine. And so what is obvious for me, that I like the rumble, I like the tension, I like the having to pitch, I like to fail, I like all of these things I can deal with, but there's a bunch of people that don't. And so that's one thing that came out true. And the other one is that apparently it's true, because the data seems to show that designers get to a certain age when typically many other professionals, that's the age that they start evolving into the C-suite and going through. And there's a bunch of designers that are getting to their 40s and 50s, and they're saying, I'm done with this. And they're going, it's the startup through Kickstarter, or it's the vineyard in Spain or in Portugal, or this or that. They voluntarily or not jump out of the rat race and go do something else. So there was a guy that said that to me. He says, what do you mean? Do you think that if the Fortune 50 decided that they all needed a chief design officer, that if they wanted to go out, that they would find these people? They would not find these people. And it made me stop for a minute thinking, you're probably right that there's a scarcity of people for a number of reasons. And so these are all realities that are also intrinsic to how design is. And you've been successful, Greg and Loft, partly because you always understood that you can sell as much strategy as you want, as long as you can show how it can be delivered. Even if you
Right.
don't do the whole delivery, you got to deliver something that is not, a nice document, 300 pages of printed paper. And so, and I think companies that have understood that and that also have the right model to do that, because then you can't be too big, you can't be too small, you can't be just Gregor and friends. And so, yeah, what is the right setup and the right level of flexibility for you to be able to working with different companies, sell the strategy, but also being able to execute part of it. And that becomes an art form. And so my hat to you, my friend. I've
Thank you.
been in consultancy. I jumped out. It is a hard uh, um, operational model just to stay alive, and especially in today's days, anybody that is able to grow, my double hat to you.
Thank you. Well, we have about 8 minutes, and I think, if anybody from the audience has questions, please put them in the chat and we can bring them up. But I, I wanted to double click on something that you said, Chuck Carley, about this idea of selling. And, I think because I have a different spin on this, because I've spent half of my life on the corporate side, half of my life on the consulting side. And I feel like the job that I've had was very similar. It was just the stakeholders were different, right? And I feel like selling design internally and externally is just nuanced. It's the same principle. You're really just trying to show the value and trying to show and then show the impact and then deliver on that impact, right? That's the
Yes.
key.
Yeah, I guess the other difference to me was so the consultancies that I worked for the longest were Smart Design and IDEO. And we had a base of clients where there was repeat work, and we built a base of knowledge. And there I felt like the work we could deliver was actually getting to be higher quality, because we started to really deeply understand the space. So that was great. Like and maybe it's kind of being introverted or shy, like going out and meeting new people and like pitching wasn't what I really enjoyed doing as much. It was often we would get a lot of like incoming inquiries with like a request for proposal. So we'd go and meet them and write the document, and then there'd be the whole negotiation over budget. And then we would sometimes land those and sometimes not. I just found that so much of my time was spent on that sort of pitch cycle. And you don't really have that pitch cycle as much internally, because it's more like that long-term engagement.
Right.
And having more investment, and not only like your personal time investment, but like you care and you understand and you can help make things real and help bring them to market because you have that deeper understanding, versus when you're in a design consultancy, at least in my experience, they'd hire you to do like a body of work, and then you'd be off on something else, and you'd be kind of starting from scratch and learning about a whole different area.
Right.
Exactly.
But also
that's also really fun. That's also really fun and a great learning experience.
But also, companies hire you because you have worked with many other companies, and you bring that to the fold, right? And
yes,
I think a good friend of mine was that actually he was at a big design agency, and then went in house, and it was kind of like, for him, it was really, they put him on KPIs, right? So they said, okay, this factory is not performing well. Can you work out why, right? And then he did a human-centered study, and like followed the workers and realized there were like significant challenges that could be addressed. But obviously, if you're in-house, it's much harder to make these recommendations actionable, because ultimately he lost his job because the people that hired him to develop the KPIs did not agree with what he wanted to do and change, right? So as a consultant, you have that incredible power that you're like on the outside, and even if somebody brings you in, they can always be like, well, now we can actually, that's what their recommendation was, and you need a key stakeholder to kind of push it through. But I think you have more you can have more impact on an organization from the outside sometimes than from the inside, right? Especially on
Yeah.
these,
It,
like,
dep-
on these
it
sticky,
depends what you're trying to change, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And people have told me sometimes that, oh, Jose, you're very good at selling. And I say, well, I only sell well what I'm passionate about. And so I I don't know about you guys, but I had a stint in my life, 6 months, where I was a business manager, nothing to do with design or innovation. I was a business manager. I hated, and I was pretty bad at it. I think, to be honest. So I found my own place, which is I know where I want to be. I know where my passion is. And at that level, then I can function. Like I can sell and pitch design because I'm trying to create conditions for that design to take place. So it's for me, it's like a consequence. It's sort of a normal thing. You put me out of this environment, I'm useless. And so this level of understanding of where do you play, where you don't play, where do you feel comfortable, where is your passion, and it many times ends up supporting. And was called saying it's like you can do it, you can learn the tricks, but is that what you want to be doing, and is that what ultimately will make you be successful? Because if you also are not appreciating it, soon enough you'll probably hit the wall.
Yep. But I think also each organization is so different, right? I mean, Carly, you probably know this from, I mean, Ford is probably totally different than Chase and completely different than Walmart, right? So
Talk
Yeah,
about
there's
three
some,
creatures.
yeah, I would say there's some things that are very consistent working for these large organizations, and then things that are truly unique.
Yeah. Well, the three of them are beasts in the sense they're huge. And so I'm sure there's qualities there that come across for large organizations. I'm saying this because I also work in a large organization. I think there's some sort of bestial qualities that come to large corporations.
But I think that, we have 2 minutes left. I don't know if anybody is dropping any questions here, but um, I want to make a point about this because I feel like even within large organizations, there are small teams that are effective. And these are the ones you want to work with, right? And I feel like, we work with 3M, massive organization, and we've always been very successful because the team we're working with is like 20, 30 people, right? It's not, massive, just because we get in and out of these innovation engagements where they really have a challenge that we can make a big difference, right? So I feel like, and I'm sure it's the same with you guys, like, the IoT team at Signify is probably not, 500 people, it's probably 50 people, right? So you can make a big impact there, right? With design.
Yeah, it's people, it's groups, and it's people. In the end, I think this is one thing that maybe Carly might agree that design leadership ends up knowing how to fine tune, which is who are the people, who are the teams that, and they might even not know anything. These people, I've worked with some people that actually were very honest and saying, I don't really know much about design, but I trust that you do. This is what I need to get done. These are my goals. This is what will make a difference. Can you help me? So when you find those people are fantastic. Those are the champions that end up helping us so many times, the entire organization, on how things can be done. But that in itself can be a weird thing, because it can be like the chairs. You might bet on somebody that 2 years later leaves. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee success, but it is a good way to progress.
Right. We're at time, and I think Sonima had one quick question. I'm going to have it for Carly, which is basically, how do you create kind of rituals or frameworks within design groups that they can thrive and explore more boldly ideas that you feel like are important for the business?
So I think having a really well-defined brief is essential. I've had projects that have been very like, getting to your point of exploring boldly, where we've explored so boldly that it's been hard to like pin down what the best solution or approach might be, or if the brief is just so wide. So I think a combination of having a very targeted outcome that you're working towards and bringing like a group of talented people together to problem solve. I know early in my time at Walmart, like within my first 3 months, we were developing like a North Star vision. There had been a lot of work already done. The people who were working on the project had a lot of knowledge, but we really, to me, what was super exciting about that was like getting into the nuanced details of how we make this complex system work in a new way. and just we were under a tight timeline. We were working really hard. I think getting that sort of like that alchemy of talented people working on something they care about towards a very specific goal. And having with that project, we had our product and business and engineering and operations team all on board, that we were working towards the same goal together. I think that was those types of projects are very satisfying, and are, since you're working with your partners from the outset, ideally you're working together to move that business metric.
Excellent. Well, thank you, both of you. This was a wonderful conversation.